All right, so Hope.
Yeah, so if you guys want to, you can just talk to us afterwards if you're interested or not. And also, there's two things up there. For those who were here yesterday, you'll remember this, but those who are new, there's a sign up for anyone who wants to go through the illumination ceremony. As we said yesterday, the illumination ceremony going forward, compared to the one we did for opening weekend, will be a private ceremony, meaning that only the people who are signed up to go through it will be here, as well as members. If you're a card-carrying member, you can be here. And then any family members, if the person who's going through the ceremony wants to bring a loved one or whatever, they're allowed to do that as well. But we just kind of want to make it a private thing so that we had a lot of people in here that, it became a little disruptive. So, but then when we had the ceremony itself, it was okay, but we just want it to be a private thing. The illumination ceremony is for once, when you've come and you've decided, that this is the path that you want to be on, and you want to become a member of the church. It's an awakening ceremony. So that would be, you can sign up there. Then there's also another sign up over there that is, we don't want to be the only ones speaking all the time. We want other people to have an opportunity to speak. This is an open forum. So if there's a subject that one of you guys want to speak on, feel free to sign up. Now, if you don't want to speak, some people don't want to do that, but they want to learn about a specific subject. You can also write the subject that you're interested in. Don't put speaker on there, just put your subject, and we'll try to find an appropriate speaker for that specific subject. So, for example, we were just talking about December. In December, most of our meetings will be made up of things that have to do with that time of year. We're going to be having some talks on the solstice, some talks on Yuletide, on Christmas, on Mithras. So there'll be several different things that are related to that time. So like I said, if you guys are interested in a specific subject, just put it down, and we'll try to find somebody who can speak to that. All right, well, welcome. And again, one other thing, there's some refreshments back here. There's coffee, drinks. There's a restroom off to the left. So if you guys, feel like you need something, feel free to scoot on through. I know it's crowded in here, and we actually added another row because yesterday people kept coming and people were standing. So we wanted to try and make it so that people could sit down. Okay. So tonight, my talk is going to be on Luciferian thought throughout the centuries and the meanings and the Luciferian perspectives of that thought. And a lot of it's going to be on quotes throughout the different centuries. So what is Luciferian thought? It is the act of thinking for oneself, going beyond the face value to seek the truth through knowledge, education, and experience. And through that, developing your own opinions that guide your decisions. It's also then being responsible for those decisions, and often requires further thought, further education and experience, and an evolution of these thoughts when making the same decision the next time. Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech. That was Benjamin Franklin in 1722. Free thinking is a natural, primal human instinct. Without it, we would have had very little progress as humanity as a whole. We might still be walking on all fours if some ancestral primate didn't have a thought to stand on two legs and found it beneficial to do so. It has influenced, free thinking has influenced scientists, doctors, artists, and our forefathers in the United States when developing our Bills of Rights and our Constitution. It's what the most developed countries in the world share in common. So why would some want to suppress this instinct to form one's own thoughts? Free thinking is dangerous. It's thought to be dangerous, I should say. It causes the questioning of authority, laws, religion, etc. And that questioning can lead to disobedience, and that disobedience can lead to rebellion. And we're not talking about necessarily just a civil rebellion or a fight, a physical fight. We're also talking about turning away from thoughts that are common within society. And these behaviors are catchy. You can see an example of this in the U.S. right now regarding Christianity. 10 years ago, the statistics showed that 76% identified themselves as Christian. Today, that number is much lower, somewhere around 70%. That statistic is also affected by other factors such as age. 50 years or older are much more likely to believe in God, and also education. The higher the education, the less likely you are to believe in a God. These statistics are based on Gallup polls and census records. The reality of this is that as we've raised our children to be more independent and have more independent thought, with an emphasis on education, today in the U.S., only 34% of ages 20 to 30-year-olds have a religious affiliation. So that's a huge difference when you think of the 50-year-olds and up, who are about 70%, whereas in the 20 to 30-year-old range, it's only 34%. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't believe in a God. It just means that right now they're moving away from religious affiliations. Which means that they're willing to be open-minded and look at several different things, including history and other religions and other cultures. From about 800 BC to about 1200 BC, the traits that were revered and looked high upon were traits like greatness, strength, nobility, heroism, success, assertiveness, pride, excellence. Seek great heights and fulfill your human potential. These were common thoughts during that time. Mediocrity and weakness was looked down upon by the ancients of this period. Here's a couple quotes from that time period. So we're talking about 800 BC to 1200 BC. Wisdom never lies. That's by Homer. The difficulty is not so great to die for a friend, but to find a friend worth dying for. Also Homer. For you are goddessnesses, or goddess, wait, is that right? Okay. You are goddessnesses, inside on everything, know everything. But we mortals hear only the news and know nothing at all. So I read that one, and the reason I feel that that's kind of a Luciferian saying, I was talking to Michael today, because what I believe he's saying here is that we have all the answers on the inside, and we know this to be true. However, we only hear what's on the outside, and therefore we know nothing at all because we're listening to what's on the outside. Death is an evil. Actually, I'm going to read that. These are two quotes that by the same person. It's the same quote, but interpreted in different ways. Death is an evil. The gods have so judged. Had it been good, they would die. That's by Sapio. And he says, and this is another interpretation, a much easier to understand interpretation, says, death must be an evil, and the gods agree with this, for why else would they live forever? So in those days, they didn't look at death as something, to look forward to, that we're going to have these great wonders and things like that. They thought if there was gods that thought that it was so wonderful, why weren't they, why were they immortal? Good people do not need laws to tell them to act responsibly, while bad people will find the way around the laws, and that's Plato. So, it's not that I'm saying that we need lawlessness here. However, if you're a good person, it's inside you. You know right from wrong. And I don't know if you want to say good, but when you have that inside you to know right and wrong, you don't need someone to tell you what's right and wrong. And if you are so inclined, you're going to circumvent that anyway. So it doesn't matter whether the laws are in place or not. You don't develop courage by being happy in your relationships every day. You develop it by surviving difficult times and challenging adversity. That's Epicurus. The real destroyer of liberties, of the people is he who spreads among them bounties, donations, and benefits. That's Plutarch. And I don't need a friend who changes when I change and who nods when I nod. My shadow does that much better. Also Plutarch. I'm not, I like this one too, I'm not afraid of an army of lions led by a sheep. I'm afraid of an army of sheep led by a lion. That was Alexander the Great. Those thought processes in that time was very Luciferian thoughts. And they valued these specific types of traits that somehow, over the centuries, became traits that are undesirable. So we'll talk about that in a second. Well, actually now. Sometime after the creation of the Bible, those traits that were once revered are now believed to be wrong, and that it's wrong to have pride. It's wrong to, have success or assertiveness. You need to be humble. You need to be meek. You need to, not be boastful. This religion grew out of a tribal group that was at one time were believed to be slaves. And what I want to do is do kind of like an experiment. I'm going to have you guys close your eyes for a moment. And I want you to imagine that you are a slave in that time period. And I want you to think about all the confinements, you're living in a dark world with very little food to feed your family. You're, uncomfortable. You don't have nice clothes. You don't have all of those different things. And now imagine that I want you to imagine what those who enslave you represent. So think about, and this we're specifically talking about Christianity at this time, so we're talking about the Egyptians. So think about what that looks like to you. What do they have versus what you have as the slave? And I want you to think about how you would feel about those who enslaved you. And what they represent. Strength in conquering your people. Success in the enslavement of your people. Profits from your enslavement. Pride of your enslavement. Those are all things that they saw every day on a daily basis. Okay, so you guys can open your eyes now. But I wanted you to really think about that process and understand where this came from and why these people started to kind of hate those traits that at one time were very revered. And it's understandable because, slavery is wrong and of any kind, whether it's, a mental slavery through religion or a physical slavery from a person. And so I can kind of understand what they saw every day. All of these things would become in your eyes evil. Things that you didn't want to become yourself. So it makes sense that all of these traits would become something that would be avoided within their own religion, and that the weaker and more dependent on each other or dependent from outside help would be a basis for a new religion because they wanted something to look forward to, right? The life they lived was not great. They wanted to feel like somebody loved them and that they were going to get a reward, for their, time on earth and what they went through. So, in the Bible, in its current state, it was created and upheld as the only The Bible, in its current state, was created and upheld as the only religion in around the 4th century. In that area, when they created the Bible, there were other religions going on in different countries. When Constantine the Great and his council were given the task of separating divinely inspired writings from those who did not want, that they felt didn't belong in the Bible. So again, man made those decisions as to what was in the Bible and what would not be. It should be noted that Constantine was originally a pagan and only turned to Christianity as a way to unite and control his fragmented empire. Now I'm going to read you some quotes that came after that time period, after the Bible in the state that we know it was created and put together. The bread you do not use is the bread of the hungry. The garment hanging on your wardrobe is the garment of the person who is naked. The shoes you do not wear are the shoes of those who are barefoot, and the money that you keep locked away is the money of the poor. The acts of charity that you do not perform are the injustices that you commit. So you can start to see that in this time period there was a lot of guilt-ridden rhetoric being said, things to make people feel guilty for having success, guilty for, having things or whatever. That was Saint Basil the Great, the 4th century bishop and theologian. Here's another one. Lift up and stretch out your hands, not to the heaven, but to the poor. For if you stretch forth your hands to the poor, you have reached the summit of heaven. But if you lift up your hands in prayer without sharing with the poor, it is worth nothing. Every family should have room where Christ is welcome, and the person of the hungry and thirsty stranger. The poor are a greater temple than the sanctuary. This altar, the poor, you can raise up anywhere on the street and offer liturgy at any hour. So when I hear these things, I think there's good sentiment behind it. They wanted to do good things, but at the same time making other people feel guilty for having stuff, or if you didn't, have the means to be charitable, you were, you could feel guilt for that, or you feel like you didn't go, weren't going to go to heaven. Different things like that. And that was St. John Chrysostom. I don't know if I said that right. 4th and 5th century. What is tolerance? It is the consequence of humanity. We are all formed of frailty and error. Let us pardon reciprocally each other's folly. That is the first law of nature. That's Voltaire. I guess I didn't actually, to be completely honest with you, I had not read a ton of Voltaire's stuff, and when I started doing this, I started looking into it, and I realized how faith-based his philosophy and his stuff was. Faith consists in believing when it is beyond the power of reason to believe. That's also Voltaire. So it's a huge difference between what you read before and after. In between there are some differences. I mean, you're going to see some more faith-based before BC as well, and you'll see some that are a little less, but it was a lot more difficult to find, honestly, quotes that came after, or during that, I think it was the 4th century, did I say? 4th and 5th century. AD, because a lot of the quotes really that people were following were from the Bible. Those were the based things, and there wasn't a lot of philosophy that I could find during that specific time period. So first of all, before we go on, because I have some other quotes that I want to read that are more past that, I just want to ask, what do you guys think about that? Do you agree with that, or do you disagree? Any thoughts or comments on it? Can I say something? Go ahead. No? Anyone? Okay. Well, then I'm going to go on with the Luciferian quotes. These are more closer to now, in our last few centuries. That which does not kill us makes us stronger. That was Friedrich Nietzsche. The mind is its own place, and itself can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven. Interestingly enough, that quote came from Milton's Paradise Lost. It was Lucifer speaking, but it was I really liked what he had said. He says, the mind is its own place. It can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. This is your place, and what you make of it is up to you. The man who does not value himself cannot value anything or anyone. That was Ayn Rand. She's one of my favorites. In order to deal with reality successfully, to pursue and achieve the values which his life requires, man needs self-esteem. He needs to be confident in his efficacy and worth. Ayn Rand. Again, her whole thing, she was really, I mean, there are some differences that I don't necessarily agree with in her philosophy, but I liked the fact that she really valued the human potential and wanting people to fulfill their human potential. In a society, one does not have to deal with those who are irrational. One is free to avoid them. Again, Ayn Rand. I have quite a few in here. One more from her. No man can have a right to impose an unchosen obligation, an unrewarded duty, or involuntary servitude on another man. There can be no such thing as the right to enslave. And they're not just talking about physical enslavement, they're talking about she's talking about mental enslavement and societal enslavement, and making that feel of guilt if you don't perform in the way that society believes that you should. Christianity grew out of utterly false soil, in which all nature, every natural value, every reality had the deepest instincts of the ruling class against. It was a form of deadly hostility to reality which has never been surpassed. And that was Friedrich Nietzsche. We must not deck out and adorn Christianity. It has waged a deadly war upon the higher type of man. It has set a ban upon all the fundamental instincts of this type. Christianity has sided with everything weak, low, and botched. That again was Friedrich Nietzsche. He had some extreme thoughts. I mean, he also was valued for his, belief in human potential and people wanting to fulfill their human potential. However, when I think about balance for Luciferian, he wasn't extremely balanced because he really loathed the people that were weak or lower, and he really had a loathing for that. And but if you read his stuff, I understand where he came up with that and why he felt that way. He really felt that anyone should be prepared to deal with life, and that you are responsible for the things that happen in your life, that you need to stand up, and if you're not, then that's your fault if you're not dealing with those things. All courses of action are risky, so prudence is not in avoiding danger, because it's impossible, but calculating risk and acting decisively. That was Machiavelli. Minds are of three kinds. One is capable of thinking for itself, another is able to understand the thinking of others, and the third can neither think for itself nor understand the thinkings of others. The first is to be the highest excellence, the second is excellent, and the third is worthless. And that was Machiavelli as well. Okay. And then the last part that I have as far as quotes, and then I want to open it up to find out what you guys think as far as, do you think these are Luciferian? Do you think that they fit within our Luciferian values and thoughts? And we'll go from there. But this last part, and this will be for another day when we talk about this piece specifically, but I want to read some of these quotes. But there's a general thinking in our society that the United States was founded on Christian values. And if you read our Bill of Rights, our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, there are some very anti-specific Christian elements. And I think that this last part that I'm going to read is all quotes that were done from our forefathers in this country. And I think they're relevant to us because we live in this country. And I think that, we need to understand and know what really this country was founded on. It wasn't one specific religion at all. So this is one. One of the animosities, of all the animosities which have existed among mankind, those which are caused by a difference of sentiment and religion appear to be the most inveterate and distressing, and ought to be deprecated. I was in the hopes that the enlightened and liberal policy which has marked the present age would at least have reconciled Christians of all denominations so far that we should never again see the religious disputes carried to such a pitch as to endanger the peace of society. And that was George Washington himself. And he said, and we saw it for this particular, church out here with the protesters, fighting amongst themselves, for differences of religious, thought. The divinity of Jesus is made a convenient cover for absurdity. Nowhere in the Gospels do we find the precept for creeds, confessions, oaths, doctrines, and a whole cartload of other foolish trumpery that we find in Christianity. That was John Adams. The citizens of the United States of America have the right to applaud themselves for giving to mankind examples of their enlarged and liberal policy, a policy worthy of imitation, wrote Washington. All possess a like liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. It is now no more that toleration is spoken of as if it was by the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For happily the government of the United States, which gives to no bigotry, no sanction, and no persecution, and to persecution no assistance, requires only that they live under its protection, should demean themselves as good citizens. And that was also George Washington. Religious bondage, shackles, and debilitates of the mind are unfits. Let me start that all over, sorry. Religious bondage, shackles, and debilitates the mind and unfits it for every noble enterprise. And that was James Madison. In every country and in every age, the priest has been hostile to liberty. He is always in alliance with the despot, abating his abuses in return for protection of his own. It is error alone that needs the support of the government. Truth can stand by itself. That was Thomas Jefferson. I'm going to skip a couple. Let me see. Okay. Religious controversies are always productive of more acrimony and irreconcilable hatreds than those which spring from any other cause. Of all the animosities that have existed, those which caused by difference of sentiment in religion appear to be the most irreverent and distressing. And George Washington, I think that was a longer version of what I had read at the beginning. And then, America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. I like that one because even though it's talking about America, I think it's a very Luciferian thought, and we can think about it even for ourselves. If we're to be destroyed, we will destroy it ourselves, right? It's not from the outside. It's within us to determine, how that will happen in that destruction. If freedom of speech is taken away, the dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. And that was George Washington. So freedom of speech, they kind of talked a lot about, but I think that when we talk about freedom of speech, that's also freedom of thought, and free thinking and learning things for yourself. And that's all I have. Thank you. Now, I just wanted to ask you guys, so what did you guys think about those quotes? Were there any that you really particularly liked? You don't have to remember the whole thing, but yeah.
I think I like the Nietzsche.
Yes.
It seemed a little extreme, like you said, that one. And the one where you said, good men don't need to be told knows, but bad men will just find ways to make.
Yeah, I think that was, yes. Yeah. And it's interesting because on the way, before we came over here, I was watching, there's a documentary done by a university professor. He actually did a thing on Nietzsche. There's another part to it, but I like the Nietzsche part of it. And I thought it actually might be a good thing to do a showing here sometime because it was really interesting. And one of the things he talked about was Nietzsche's belief that moral compass was biological. It's influenced by social, things. But for example, what that means is you could be brought up in any religion. That doesn't make you a good person or a bad person. You make yourself a good person or a bad person, because there are good and bad in all of us. And you either have that in you or you don't. You know what I mean? You're either, so when we talk about the laws and circumventing the laws, if you have that in you to do it, you're going to do it no matter what. No matter what laws, what country, whatever, you're going to have that within you. And so he's a very interesting, person. Like I said, he did have some extreme views, but you also have to remember that all of these people grew up in different times, or lived in these different times, and there were a lot of different things going on during the times that they lived. He lost both of his parents. He lived through some real tragedy, growing up, and so he formed a lot of these views based on that, and then his education as well. What?
Speaking to your biological aspect, I know there's been a lot of studies with like orangutans, for example, where orangutan will do something violent towards another, and then they'll actually stone that orangutan to death.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a social construct within a lesser, if you want to say, species that speaks to that exact biologic standpoint.
Yep, exactly. Because the thing is that even with consequence, and people know the law consequence, the religious consequence, if you're religious, people still act out and in bad behavior. So there's got to be some biological pieces to it as well as the sociological piece. Do you think that any of these have any fruit within our life today? Can they be meaningful in today's life at all? How do you think it could be?
Absolutely. Going back to Nietzsche, one of his constructs was the Superman, called
Yes.
the Ubermensch, but you know that. But, and it was all about self-excellence, all about being the ultimate person you can be. And I think it's valuable to look at the deities of ancient cultures before Christianity, because they were strong and they were powerful.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted humans to aspire to that strength and that power.
Mm-hmm.
And those deities, those pantheons, span a range of human emotions. And so, of course, if you were a good person, they would pick the good gods, right? Because you want to be more like Odin or Thor, right? And so I think it's important to realize that, and to see how spirituality in general has been watered down by monotheism.
Right, exactly. And the old gods had more balance to them, right? Because they weren't all good or all bad. They fit more within what's natural as a human, or within nature, destructive and constructive pieces to them. And so you could relate to them a lot easier, I think, because when you're trying, and they don't, that's that whole guilt thing. When you're trying to aspire to something, there's an impossibility to completely be. It builds guilt within the self, and then breaks down the self-esteem. And why do you guys think that in society, or do you think in society today, that sometimes those values are looked down upon, like being prideful or success? I mean, we just had a recent thing on our forum where people were, somebody was very upset and talking about, making it sound like it's bad for any of us who are within, the leaders of the church to be successful, because, I don't know why. I really don't understand why that would be looked down upon. And,
I think it speaks to suppression and resentment. I think it speaks to a nature of desire for freedom, and seeing that in others and feeling resentment and suppression and anger towards that.
that's a good observation. I like that.
Yeah, I think also too, people living vicariously, like if they see somebody putting efforts in and then not receiving rewards for it and kind of failing, they might feel like I'm more connected to that person because I know I'm not capable of winning that reward. And then when that person does reach that next level, of attainment, then it becomes jealousy, and I like what she said as well. And I feel that's the experience I've taken from it.
That's something that I think you hit a mark with. There's also the thing, like, as a Luciferian, when I started, I wasn't successful. It took me a long time to build up in my former career, the things I did before this.
and I became successful, but there was a long time to where, some of your friends, they get successful first, and you see that. I never looked at them and said, oh, I don't like them, I didn't resent them, but I knew that I wanted to do and went for it. So it's that kind of considerations and thought, two different ways of...
And I think
a strong person will fall down and get back up, and fall down again and get back up. Continue that, where a weak person will fall down and stay down and ask, why am I down? Why? Oh, why?
And it becomes comfortable to stay down.
Yeah.
I resent those who are standing, who are able to get back up. Is somebody back here? No. Yeah, and I agree with all of that, I think. And do you guys think that, so do you think that, and does anybody in here have a different view, or think that some of this stuff is, some of these particular things like strength, assertiveness, pride, success are not necessarily good things?
I think they're all good things. I think you have to balance your ego with the two, because you can run into aspects or groups of people that their ego is so large that
elitists, right?
You can't even communicate with them. So there's a little bit of a balance, but I don't think that any of those are negative in any way.
And speaking of ego, does anybody in here think that ego is, anybody have an opinion, good or bad?
I think it can be both. I think if you become so self-aggrandizing that you can't look to where you can learn, or you can forge yourself throughout life, regardless of what you know. You become your own worst enemy and stunt yourself.
Right. I agree. I think the ego is necessary, and it's something that is healthy as long as it's kept within balance, and that's the Luciferian ways. Everything is kept within balance. You can't, and that's one of the things is we talk about exploring the unconscious or primal instincts along with the conscious things, because if you don't understand those parts of you that are primal and the unconscious spirit within you, you can't control it. It comes out in various ways. It manifests itself in various ways that are not productive to you as a person, and probably not to the people that are around you and society in general. So, that's one of the big things for Luciferians is exploring that and understanding it so that you can then control that. So, for example, I like to think of someone who's like, somebody who's got a lot of anger and fights, all the time. You got to figure out, explore that whole thing. Why you're doing that? What's that all about? Is it a bad thing? Was there a reason to fight at certain times? Is there a reason not to fight at certain times? And you have to learn how to control that behavior within yourself. So, yes.
That's one thing that really attracted me, this idea of celebrating the shadow self. We're just recognizing it, for this control activity, or whatever. But I didn't see that in other right-hand path religions. Not to say there's something wrong with that, but I found that was, I like that honesty, that balance.
Right. And understanding that it's not, those aren't bad aspects of the self. They are simply aspects of the self, and we have to learn how to manage those aspects, all aspects. We can't just look at one side. And if you do that, I feel like that, and this is just my opinion, but I feel like monotheism it sets people up for failure, because there's only one way. And there's there's only good and there's only bad. There is no in between, and not a lot of forgiveness in there. And we're humans, and those things are in all of us. So we have to learn how to celebrate both and control both. But is there anything else? Okay, that's it. Thank you, guys.
Hello, everyone. Tonight, and thank you, Hope, for the great perspective that you give with those quotes. And part of the path of Luciferianism is to, like you said, explore the shadow self, and to know who you are. Know thyself is a big deal in all kind of magical mindsets. Tonight I'm going to talk about Luciferian light, change in self-evolution in accordance with the will. I'm going to give kind of a Luciferian perspective on what the adversary is. I know probably some of you have questions about how do you visualize archetypes, symbols, and why this one. And one of the things that you'll find in Luciferianism is that there are layers of exploration to do. As a philosophy, that's the kind of gateway. And some people, the philosophy, as it will work for them, will be good for the rest of their life. Some people are interested in deeper aspects, magic, or, the process of apotheosis from that kind of a perspective. And we have that too. There's no cookie cutter for everyone to go through. They have to decide and adapt what practices you want to explore. To offer perspective of Lucifer and the associated symbols of the adversary, it is important to define some simple foundations of how we perceive the opposer from a Luciferian point of view. In Luciferianism, these powers or forces in nature are often creative and destructive. One makes way for the other, and balance maintains and supports evolution. This power is also symbolic of humanity and our potential as critical and skeptical individuals. Humans are at best either noble predators in nature or degenerate destroyers of their surroundings. The path of the noble predator is a conqueror who gives support to those balanced thinkers and philosophers which inspire our evolution. Some may state Lucifer and Satan are the same, but this is never from the perspective of understanding the archetype or the symbol. It's generally from the point of view that the Judeo-Christian cosmology is the status quo and authority on your collective existence. Luciferians simply reply, that is not so, and with a little understanding and thought can suggest a more challenging and inspiring depth beyond monotheistic blind faith. A deific mask is a symbol often represented as a specific type of power. This type of power is understood on various levels from the unconscious and conscious mind. Luciferianism is a collective philosophy and path to power which has access to perceive the adversary of blind faith and monotheistic religion from the vast pool of pre-Christian pantheons and even the early Christian symbolism of the so-called enemy of established structure. Satan was slowly developed as an abstract messenger of the Old Testament, Yahweh, and finds independence and representing the traits of the enemy gods and people of the New Testament. Originally, a messenger. That's all it was. Before Christianity, there was no Satan. It's from an Aramaic translation of Satana, which means adversary. And there are variants in Hebrew, and it's pretty easy to see how that happened. It was a title. And in the New Testament, all of the old gods became Satan, the adversary. And it was what they were trying to push out. And that meant it had to take those attributes. I find the Judeo-Christian and Hebrew enemy of the New Testament and the book of Enoch, which was kicked out of the completed Bible, to be far more inspiring as a symbol and model for rational self-interest and reestablishing the ideals of seeking insight from experience, overcoming your obstacles and indulgence with moderation. This lays ground for the next step, personal subjective perception with the mythology inherent in the symbol. This assimilates into a developing spirituality which in Luciferianism is unshakable once it has been created. It is a contingent upon properly understanding the value of the symbol and the honesty of what you desire, fear, and the strength to balance both. So, in shaping your own personal philosophy and your experience and the insight from that, you're going to begin to develop your own personal spirituality. And the symbols all have direct connection to that. And what you value has connection with that. Once that's created, it's very hard to shake that, because that's something you know and instinctively feel. Often Luciferianism presents symbols and specific epithets to represent actions or occurrences of the adversary. The adversary, as it is called, is a motivating force inherent in both nature and within living beings. This current of energy challenges us, motivates us to overcome, and through the insight of experience can inspire self-evolution, if the perception of the individual is aligned towards this path. And what does it mean to be aligned towards the path of the adversary? And how does the adversary inspire self-excellence? The adversary is described in Luciferianism as the stirrings of primal raw power. This can be understood as chaos and darkness, and it is vital to the emergence of light. The adversary exists beyond our perceptions of space and time, beyond the concepts of cohesion and sequence known as the casual or physical world. When Luciferians state that we do not worship Lucifer or submit to a so-called higher power, we mean it absolutely. By the Luciferian identifying, commanding, and balancing the axis of will, desire, and belief, the adept is able to establish the foundations of the GCOL, being power, balance, wisdom, strength. Satan or the adversary is not the devil wishing to lead you to a Christian hell. Rather, this is the force of power of opposition in nature and primal instinct which motivates us to seek individual greatness or to fall in weakness. Submitting to something greater which does not have your best interests in mind. Satan is thus a symbol or deific mask associated with the primal instinct and base desires, the power of rebellion, indulgence, and carnal experience in the world. Lucifer is the light bringer, heralding the morning and evening by the appearance of the blazing Venus, long respected as a balanced force of both love and war. Lucifer is thus a symbol or deific mask representing the bringer of light, who is the great angel or messenger, as it's translated, of deeper knowledge of our potential as individuals. Okay, so adversarial magic is the same as science. You think science cause and effect. Magic is the same thing. It's all in how you approach it, which will be different. Some people like ritual, ceremony. Some people just think about it and do it. There's no difference. As long as you're connected to that aspect, then that's all you need. You have to do what you're inspired to do. Adversarial magic is causing change according to the will, what you desire. And it's on many levels. It's short-term and it's long-term. And utilizing the philosophy kind of builds that in to where your thoughts, as you'll see, have great amounts of energy and power towards your future. How you perceive will equal what happens later. Adversarial magic requires a certain level of imagination and functional truth. That's like personal mythology. And it's subjective. I don't say it in the sense that in my meditations, I don't stop meditating or what I'm focusing on and go try to tell everyone what I'm thinking about. It's private mythology. You know, it's something that inspires me, and I just move on from that. I'm going to talk about, very briefly, darkness and chaos, so I can kind of give you a perspective on what that is to some Luciferians. In the chaos of primal darkness, there is a constant flux in which nameless forms emerge and collapse within it. This adversarial power is within us, outside of us, and within nature itself. Challenging, inspiring strength in strife, and disorder is becoming of a conqueror. As we understand in the theory of evolution, our origin is found in the dark abyssic waters and chaos. Necessity and circumstance pushed various species into new levels of adaptation or death. We can still see that evolution today in certain animals. That change and necessity inspires us forward. Consider briefly the Babylonian tale of Enuma Elish. It's a myth of Tiamat and Marduk and the creation of the world. From the primal waters of darkness, Tiamat existed with her shape-shifting type of combinated animals and what they called Mishwan, or demons, in Mesopotamia. And she represented the unconscious, our primal origin. The gods who became into being by Apsu and Tiamat, Marduk, Ea, and all the different Mesopotamian gods, wanted to create a new level of order. It was their desire. So they fought, and Tiamat was defeated. The form she was taken was dismantled, and the world was made. This is myth. But if you look at evolution and how the theory is we emerged as a organism and expanded into so many different things, then it's a functional truth. Because it's you can look at the symbol and see, oh, that's logical. It's a nice way of wrapping it up and exploring it. Let's see. The adversary inspires self-excellence. Luciferians by nature do not always seek the path of least resistance unless it serves their goals. We recognize that the path of the lazy and unimaginative is actually the mainstream mass of sheeple who will all have come to quietly detest. The path of struggle and adversity is, if perceived in a Luciferian perspective, may be a catalyst for the self-transformation. Insight and power we all thirst for in our own way. Overcome your obstacles and find wisdom, power, balance, and strength. Think of the Luciferian as a strong-willed, independent individual. If you can do it yourself, even if difficult, you reach your limits of what you feel is achievable, and in turn, self-evolution occurs. This is the path in practice. Literally, the lifelong process of apotheosis. You are the point of balance between the crossroads. You hear about crossroads from a magical perspective, like Hecate. It's used in some voodoo paths. But for Luciferians and the X, the crossroads is, the center is you. You are the one who makes, you're the axis point in which all manifests. Think as a god or goddess and act in pure self-love to deeply enrich your life. So in summary, the adversary has different masks. These are symbols. They represent power in nature and within ourselves. Some who ask, is Satan the same as Lucifer? It's the same adversarial current or power. It's presented and manifests differently. We place value on those symbols. But never from a Luciferian perspective do we see them as destructive or negative. I find beauty in the